In no particular order, we have Samantha Godfrey from Pharma. She's a specialist in pharmaceutical distribution and supply chain issues. She's got a lot of experience marrying people and their ideas with the marketplace and how to get their products into the marketplace. We have Kyle Delbro, who is with VRI, a wholly owned subsidiary of Merck, which, if you're not familiar with VRI, is dedicated to improving the cost efficiencies, reach, and effectiveness of healthcare through new and innovative technologies. And we have David Nash, who's the Dean of the School of Public Health at Jefferson Medical College. Population Health, sorry. I always make that mistake. I've known him many years, and I still make that mistake. Forgive me, David. So anyway, we're here today to talk about revenue, how to find it, how to grow it, and what to do with it when we have it. And we're going to take a few different perspectives because we have, as you might imagine, if you don't already know, a mix of people who are here with big pharma experience and also smaller startup experience and aspirations. The conversation today, and it is a conversation, as you can tell, we have some very nice chairs set up, and I won't stand here the whole time and play schoolmarm, but the idea is to have a nice conversation about where we think things are headed and some interesting ideas. It runs about 45, 50 minutes, and we're going to leave some time at the end for questions and answers. Feel free, of course. The room will probably fill up. I think there are a couple of other sessions that are winding up, so there's a little overlap. But feel free, as time goes on, to get a question or two ready so you can raise your hand toward the end. So with that said, I'm going to make just a couple of opening remarks, and then we're going to sit down and chat. And as I say, feel free to think of some questions toward the end of the session. So when we think about revenue and the pharmaceutical industry, obviously it's still there. We have more than a dozen big global drug makers and numerous, countless other companies, biopharma or biotech or specialty or generic. There are all sorts of different labels and obviously different distinct activities, and they're all ringing the register every day, every year. The real issue, though, as we all know, is how is that going to grow and grow sufficiently for as long as possible in this environment. That's always the challenge whenever you have a business. But this environment the last several years has been particularly challenging. Before I got ready for this session several days ago, I was looking something up, and by accident I clicked on a story from 2003, exactly 10 years ago. That was by some consultants at Bain that ran in the In Vivo magazine, and it was all about how the notion of the blockbuster was dead, and we all remember that word and how that was pretty much a big, key, important, exciting buzzword in the pharmaceutical industry for many years. However long it's been dead, whether it's 10 years or not, I don't know. Obviously, there are still blockbusters out there, but they're not necessarily coming down the pike every day anymore, and it's not even how people are trained to think about the possibilities. Instead, in the ensuing years, we've heard all sorts of other ideas. Biosimilars might revolutionize the landscape. The emerging markets. If you're a small company, orphan drugs. But obviously, there are many different ways to go. Technology is opening up the possibilities. So the question becomes, where is the most likely way to direct yourself, direct your company? So with that said, I'd like to open this up, and the people here today have very varied backgrounds, which I think is very useful. David, for instance, in addition to being with the school, has also got experience on company boards. So David, I'd like to ask you the first question, and I'm going to sit down. Where do you think pharma needs to direct itself right now to try and move that needle sufficiently? Because if emerging markets are not the salvation that everyone thought a few years ago, they're more problematic, more bumps in the road, and alliances are also challenging, whether it's with a university or a rival. Where does a pharma company look at this point?
Yeah, great question, and great to be here, and thank you all for coming. So if it's not blockbusters and it's not new alliances and it's not developing countries, where is it? Key question for today. Well, my sense is let's look at where the whole healthcare system is going, and maybe pharma can play a different sort of role. And I'm going to put two hats on. One, as you alluded to, as a board member for Endo Health Solutions right here in Malvern. So Endo has some core products, both proprietary and generic. And 3 years ago was on a strategy that turned out Wall Street didn't understand. And that strategy was to develop new revenue by purchasing a electronic medical record company, by purchasing a device company, and other companies that would do full service and own the data for, in this case, largely urologists and gynecologists working, as we say, below the belly button and above the knee. And the notion was to own everything about that: the data, the electronic record, the products, the servicing, and even help practices get feedback on how good a job they were doing so they could compete in a Obamacare world. Well, here we are, nearly 3 years later, and Wall Street punished the company for its foresight. So let me answer your question. I think we have a big education job ahead so that analysts will understand that there are actually new revenue strategies that pharma may follow, but the analysts and the street better hang on for this unusual, bumpy, uncharted journey as these companies try to figure out what does it mean when providers bear risk, what kind of data. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Let me ask you about that, because if the street is punishing a company for that strategy, let's
Right.
back up for a second and think about what that strategy can represent for any number of companies. As you very nicely painted the picture, it's below the belly button and above the knee.
Right. There's a certain evocative thing about that, isn't there? Right.
Yes, as a journalist, we love images. But seriously, the idea that you would have a company that's delivering medical solutions, branching out to
Right.
data, to giving advice to physicians,
Right.
marrying all that.
You bet.
You also mentioned a device company, so
Yep.
there's another type of product involved. You're talking about maybe not full service, but something approaching that.
Right.
A whole menu of options. Is that something, before we get to the idea that you have to sell the street, which obviously can be make or break, and in this case it was, but that doesn't mean it can't work elsewhere. So the
Correct.
question is, how do you figure out the strategy or strategy of that sort that can work? How full service can or should you be in broadening your thinking?
Well, I'll give you my N of one experience. As I said, I think for urology, gynecologic cancer, and related diseases in that whole arena, I think the firm was 3 years ahead of the marketplace. And it might turn out that we'll have to come back to that strategy as the marketplace evolves. So for me, the new revenue might still be there. Endo was too early in the game, and we're not yet reimbursed for doing a better job. I mean, that's the dark secret. Good that the doors are closed, but providers aren't competing on outcomes, not yet. So for the broader scheme of our panel, I think the new revenue strategies are in part prove that you're doing a better job and getting a better clinical outcome, and the marketplace will reward you. That's where I sure hope this is going to go.
Okay. Another question I'd like to just throw out to all three of you. I mentioned a moment ago the idea of alliances, and we've seen increasingly collaborations, whatever word we want to use, between rival drug makers. Bristol and AstraZeneca are in diabetes, for instance. Glaxo and Pfizer have the ViiV joint venture. Meanwhile, at the same time, Pfizer is looking at, they spun off the animal health unit. They're looking at unlocking the value of the different kinds of drug operations they have. Abbott has done the same with AbbVie. But a lot of that's about unlocking value. And that's not the same thing as growing revenue.
Right.
So now I'm going to hark back to the joint venture notion. Is a joint venture, and this is a very broad 30,000-foot question, but is a joint venture in general the sort of thing worth considering? because it can do more than unlock value, but can actually marry operations that have more potential? And if there is possibility there, how seriously, how deeply do you think companies, big or medium-sized, if not small, should explore that sort of thinking?
Well,
again, all three of you, if you
go for it.
I mean, I can discuss from a small business perspective in regards to collaboration. My company, Pharma, just came out of an accelerator program based in Hawaii called Blue Startups. And for those of you that aren't on Twitter, it's a marketplace that connects medical facilities with vendors who are licensed and vetted through our system that have the products that they need. And strategic partnerships are definitely like key in initial growth in a startup coming out of an accelerator. Partnerships with hospital networks, with large distributors, small manufacturers. And what's key been for Pharma has been initially aligning ourselves with manufacturers who do not have the market pull to contract with the big three or big four, or big five for that matter, and enabling them to have access to over 500,000 different people in the US who are licensed to buy pharmaceutical products. So we bring their products from that they're manufacturing, and a lot of times it's a test strip or it's a doctor that manufactures something where they saw a need and they don't know who needs their product. So with Pharma, we're providing that avenue for them, kind of like an eBay of pharmaceuticals, so to speak. So initially in our growth, like that has been like adamant and prevalent in helping us grow as fast as possible. I can speak from a small business perspective. I don't know if you can speak from a medium-sized business.
Well, I don't know that we're medium-sized yet, but we started up as Merck trying to think about how healthcare is changing, obviously moving toward more emphasis on outcomes. And within a big pharma company, there's a certain amount of bureaucracy, lack of agility, et cetera. And so when you sort of think about how do you overcome that, how do you get into new lines of business or overcome that, I was actually, as an individual consultant, brought into Merck 4.5, 5 years ago to look at, with healthcare changing this way and technology changing at the same time, were there some intersections where technology could be deployed to help engage patients more, which is the real benefit, which is where we'll really get the better outcomes. It won't be a new pill. It won't be a new medical procedure. It will be engaging patients more effectively in their care. So in a cruel twist of fate, I came in and helped them think about some experiments they might do. In a cruel twist of fate, they did them, and then they came back to me and said, would you take one of them over? So I'm a consultant who has now been asked to put my money where my mouth is. But so what Merck did to try and have the assets and capabilities of a fairly large-sized company and not get caught up is they created what they call investment venture units. And so when there was an idea that had some market research behind it, looked like it had some staying power, they actually would roll it out into this investment venture unit, which is a wholly owned subsidiary. And the idea is to get it away from mother so that it can do its thing and be agile and react to the market, and at the same time be close enough that we can get the benefits of the assets of mother. So an example of that is we're really outcomes focused. So our initial services that are going out in the marketplace, we use Merck Outcomes Research to do a outcomes trial, a blind outcomes trial with a major academic hospital, and they've come through with and you'll see the results of that in September. But we utilized that resource to do a peer reviewable outcome study, which we think is important to our business. I mean, that's one of our, as Dr. Nash was talking about, if we can't demonstrate outcomes, what good is what we're doing? It may sound innovative, it may be sexy or whatever, but at the end of the day, if you can't demonstrate that it's gotten better outcomes for the target patients, then you really don't have anything. And we sort of believe, like Dr. Nash, that at some point, with ACOs and capitated payment models and stuff like that, that being able to generate better outcomes will find commercial adoption.
Well, I think that gets to your value question and the difference between a revenue stream and unlocking value. We're still working on the unlocking value.
Right.
That I think is the strategy, at least for the next 2 to 5 years, at least. I hope unlocking value will equal new revenue.
Exactly. So George Merck said many years ago that if you care for the patient, the revenue will follow.
Amen.
So we're hoping that that's the case again.
Could you tell me more about that trial and how that specifically might translate to more revenue? Can you bridge that gap?
It was essentially a outcomes trial that we had a theory that we could reduce readmissions for 3 disease states: congestive heart failure, AMI, and pneumonia. The reason we picked those 3 to start with is everybody knows those are the ones that CMS is currently penalizing providers if they're above some designated level in readmissions. And so we thought with the approach that we have, a combination of people, process, and technology, that would be a good place to start. It doesn't mean that that's where we're focused on. From a commercial perspective, people don't like to buy things for penalty avoidance. So the C-level people, if they're getting penalties, think if my staff worked harder or they were trained better or something else, we wouldn't be in this position. But anyway, that was just a target to get out in the marketplace. Once we thought we had a service which would do that, we enlisted Merck's Outcomes Research Group to go to one of the academic hospitals that they have collaborated with in the past, design a trial that would be statistically significant and validate, be peer reviewable by someone like Dr. Nash. He would look at it and say, yeah, that's a real trial, that I believe what was done there. And then be able to, and I can't speak to the trial yet, by the way, until it's published. Right. It's not my data to talk about. But that was a very important proof point for us. If we couldn't impact the outcomes that patients were getting, we didn't have something that we were comfortable going to market with. And
both of you, Kyle and David, have described something that to me sounds, I think, rather obvious. You're taking what most people think of at its core as a pharmaceutical company and saying, look, we've got to get into other related areas. And that's really the message that you're describing.
Part of it, for sure.
What's the other part?
Well, I guess, again, from a endo perspective, it's working more closely with our core customers. In this case, they're providers who are using the pharma products. So that means ongoing education with physicians, nurses, and others. Not just about new products, but how best to deploy the whole spectrum of products that the firm has. So working with providers, certainly really important. Working with payers, insurers, and others as to are we delivering greater value, and so should the rewards be greater? That's from our previous conversation. Unlocking that value, equaling new revenue. That's still pretty darn important. And then the ongoing research and development. So like any good pharma company, you have a pipeline of new and innovative things that got to get through the approval process. Everybody in this audience knows how difficult and expensive that is. So these are all the ongoing issues that have to be balanced. But I think, again, coming back to the theme of new revenue, I believe strongly if we could unlock that value, improve outcomes, decrease waste, get a better outcome, you ought to get rewarded. The challenge is we're sort of turning this reimbursement battleship around inside the Panama Canal right now, and it's not happening fast enough for everybody. And I'm also convinced the last piece of this is educating the analysts who are pretty narrowly focused on product. The notion of value and competing on outcomes, I'm not sure the street, at least with regard to endo, I'm not sure they understand what that even means.
So, you know, our service is once again around people, process, and technology. It's just not a technology thing. So as everybody knows, to get better outcomes with patients, what you have to try and do is change behaviors or improve behaviors.
Well, that's what all education is about.
Right, exactly. So our service, when we pick a patient up at discharge, they actually deal with the human being who does some motivational interviewing and tries to anchor their care around what motivates them for the next period of time. So what we're trying to do is generate adherence to their discharge plan. We're trying to provide services, motivation, et cetera, to improve that adherence. Now, right off the bat, and if we're able to do that, in the traditional pharma model for improving adherence, we're improving adherence to medication as well.
Key.
Which is key to better outcomes.
You bet.
And that's something that we'll demonstrate as well. So by doing that, Mother Merck will get an uplift from our patients in their core business. We're also seeing in the risk-based models that are coming into the market for complex therapies and expensive therapies, that we're seeing models where big pharma is going to payers and saying, if your patient uses our drug and it doesn't work, you don't pay.
You bet.
Mm-hmm. But how do they know the patient was adherent to the therapy, especially if it's a fairly complex therapy that requires labs and titration, et cetera? So we've actually been approached by other pharma companies who have seen us and say, could you provide the service which supports our product? Right. And then you act as the referee as well. Was that patient compliant? And so in the new model where payers, big pharma is going to payers and say, I'm willing to risk share with you. Right. A service like ours provides value. It becomes a product and a service. It's just not, if you're going to risk share, you're not just going to give your drug and hope they do the right thing with it.
Well, I'm glad that Carl brought that up. I mean, if I put my primary care hat on, so we know that half of patients who we see and give a prescription to are going to fill it, and half of those people are going to take it. So 1 out of 4 times we're doing a good job. That's not such a good batting average. So the compliance and adherence question is gigantic. It's all part of education of patients, providers, everybody. So it's not a trivial issue, and there's a lot of value to be unlocked if patients complied. I mean, Samantha knows about this in the channel. You could deliver the product, but if they ain't taking it, it's not going to work. And we know 1 out of 4 people on a good day are going to take their meds. And if it's more than one med, it's even fewer people are going to comply.
Right. Right. Let me ask you to step back for a second to the core business, whether it's a small company or entrepreneur developing a product, or everything up to the big company with huge R&D operations. Mm-hmm. That has been under pressure. Obviously, technology has made it possible to explore new possibilities. But from getting from point A to point Z, we're having a product on the shelf or in the clinic is becoming increasingly challenging, right? So what does that say about the core mission and growing the business before you get to the point where you're talking about outcomes and ancillary services?
Yeah. Wow. You want to take a shot at that?
I mean, growing the business from developing right from stage 1. And I know there are a number of startups, accelerators actually present here at MedCity Converge. And I can speak to my experience in picking the right accelerator if you have an idea, especially health tech related, and joining one of these accelerator programs. They will provide you with the network. They're going to provide you with a little bit of seed funding, whether that's $20,000, $50,000 initially for you to join this accelerator for typically a 3-month program. And with that network, you also get access to mentors who have taken companies to IPO. You get access to really high-level medical professionals, high-level pharma company professionals, executives, and they give you kind of the guidance. And a lot of them, once you get past this accelerator process, doesn't stop there after those 3 months, where typically you should have a product that is past beta phase after that 3 months. They also provide you with that network existing and going on to help you build and get additional funding, whether it's your seed funding or Series A, and going forward to build your product. And so I think in this day and age, in combining health and tech, and with there being so many avenues for people to pursue a new business or develop a new product, I think we're very, very, very lucky. And we see accelerators popping up all around the country, all around the world. And it's very, very exciting. And I know a number of people here are involved with mentoring and also being advisors to different startup groups, accelerator groups in your community, which is fantastic. It really does provide a huge value and also provides a huge network. And I would encourage anyone here as an idea to find a tech co-founder, find a co-founder who has industry experience and start building something really innovative in healthcare.
Mm-hmm. And what about the bigger players, the biggest players? Going back to the question we just started with about the core competence.
Sure. So, like Endo and lots of other companies of our size and scope, Valiant and so on, still committed to organic growth, doing a great job on that. New products, new markets, new customers. That's all still a core part of the strategy for sure. I think balancing that, as we've been talking about, with what's around the next corner on how we're going to get paid and how we market the new products is all still a huge challenge. But you're right, Ed. I mean, the core business is still developing new products, get those new products out, use them appropriately, educate the marketplace. That's still a core part of the business no matter what. And I think, again, the Wall Street rewards companies for doing that and for doing a good job at it, for sure.
Some companies have had better success rate, though, in getting new chemical entities out the door, getting them approved and into the marketplace. So that means, some have had better success rate than others the last few years. But for those who haven't, that means, they've got to look at other areas. They all should be looking at the kinds of areas you're talking about.
Right.
But for those who continue to struggle, where might they direct themselves for revenue? Should they be looking at joint ventures? Should they be looking at scaling back and focusing more on key areas? Just this morning, before I got here, I scrambled to do a quick piece about Roche. They ended a trial for a diabetes drug. Last year, they ended a trial for a cholesterol drug. These were both very high-profile attempts to broaden their known successful franchise in oncology. Maybe there are instances where companies need to focus, maybe take a step back to go 2 steps forward. Okay. Focus on the core competency and grow more revenue that way than try to diversify. Maybe not. I'm just wondering,
well, let me go
as
back
we puzzle through these
something Kyle
questions.
said, because I think there's a lot of wisdom there too. Maybe part of that strategy is, sure, develop new products and take the risk on the clinical trials, and the larger companies can do that. I think if I put my pharmacy and therapeutics committee hat on at our university hospital, where I've been for 23 years, we don't need another Me Too drug. We don't need a 10th beta blocker. We don't need a 13th ACE inhibitor. What do we need? We need good data about the outcomes if we were to use those products, and what's the end game at the patient level. So I think the part of it is get VRE to track the use and prove that you're going to reduce readmission. That's the kind of data that the P&T committee of the 21st century really needs. And companies that can help providers get that kind of information through their health economics and outcomes research team, through collaborations with schools of population health, as an example, that's another way to unlock value, get better revenue. So summary would be, we don't need a 10th Me Too drug. Hope, that if you're going to put that in your pipeline, we ain't interested. What we're interested in is, show me a marginal improvement that's going to improve the clinical outcome, reduce waste, improve outcome, reduce cost. That's the P&T strategy, in my view, moving forward.
Okay. Kyle, what do you think about this?
Well, I'm going to put out a big disclaimer here. I'm not speaking for Merck. I've been in and around the pharmaceutical industry for 25 years in technology, with companies like Siebel and Oracle and previously, et cetera. So some of the views are my own.
Okay.
But I think my personal opinion is that, and we see this in the VRE Health case. When I talked about helping people get better outcomes that are in the 3 CMS penalized disease states, congestive heart failure. If that patient's a diabetic, and all we're caring about is their congestive heart failure symptoms, and we get them to a point 30 days later they're not coming back, but we haven't addressed the diabetes, their heart issues are never going away.
Mm-hmm.
So
great example.
We got to start looking at the patient as a whole, and how do you deal with the patient across their issues and not one at a time. And I think if in pharmaceuticals, if you look at most pharmaceutical companies, they're organized around therapeutic class areas.
Right.
And so that inhibits their agility to start thinking about, is there a model where I consider the whole patient and I'm focused on that patient? Is there a way through technology, et cetera, that patient thinks the solutions he's getting from me, products and services, are tailored to me? So if I get education, it's the education that I need when I need it, demonstrated by some behaviors. When I get an intervention, it's the intervention I need based on I've tripped some threshold, my weight went up 1%, and it's now time for for me to talk to somebody. So that my disease management is tailored to me, and I'm not getting a bunch of random stuff from a bunch of different areas. And I think outcomes-based medicine will drive that. But when it becomes more personalized, the tools, the products and services become more personalized, patients will be more engaged and will get better outcomes. It's a long-winded answer, I know, but...
No, it's very interesting. You mentioned before that big pharma in particular, but most pharmaceutical companies and biotechs, they're looking at specific therapeutic categories, and as you say, they're built around that. How might they be structured otherwise to unlock, I don't want to use unlock the value, but take advantage of the kind of structure that would focus on the patient and theoretically further grow revenue, whether it's a small company or a big company? How do they rework themselves then and reorient themselves to hit the revenue?
Well, the big difficulty is what David said here. Wall Street's looking at you every quarter, and if you come up a nickel short because you're trying to change your business model, you get whacked over the head. So the Wall Street mentality means that, in general, I think companies spend 98% of their energy defending the existing fort, and 2% trying to think about new models. And that's a difficult paradigm to break out of, quite frankly, which is why Merck decided that they couldn't disturb their core business and to start these venture units to see if they could get some traction in a new model that then Merck's resources could get behind to a bigger extent. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
Well, let's go back to Carl's example of those diabetics just as a straw man. So if you could prove that your population of all patients with diabetes are moving in the right direction, their hemoglobin A1Cs are improving, they're losing fewer days from work, there's fewer readmissions, fewer hospitalizations, we're going to get rewarded for that behavior right now. So how about new partnerships with pharma, large and small? That's certainly something that we're thinking a lot about. Provider partnerships, specific accountable care organization partnerships. I mean, I think that's a definite revenue strategy beyond endo for everybody, and hopefully will lead to a better population level of care and population health. I mean, that's really what we've got to do. If you stay focused, one patient, one problem, one at a time, it's going to be awfully hard to convince anybody that there's a value proposition there. You know, sure, I get it at the individual patient, obviously pretty important if it's your fanny on the examining table, but the way we're going to get paid is, okay, of those 2,000 diabetics in your risk pool, how are you doing? Well, that can't be done by an individual provider. That's a team effort. Yeah. And what I'm suggesting is the team might be distribution channel, electronic record, and new product.
How might the partnership with an ACO, could you just fill in some of the spots on the
Yeah,
on the
so when they
canvas there?
say it's never about the money, it's all about the money.
Of course.
So follow where the money is. If whoever is at economic risk to provide the clinical service, that's your target. So it could be group practice, integrated delivery system, but and ACOs, of course, come in lots of flavors, not for today, but all sizes and shapes. So who's ever at economic risk, that might be the new partner of the future. That's my contention.
But is there a revenue sharing component?
Oh, I think there's definitely a upside sharing, downside protection, both. I think.
So it's something formalized.
It's formalized,
it's not just
and I think
distribution.
the market's wide open for that right now. Beyond the companies that we're talking about today, sure. So I think maybe a new revenue strategy, Ed, is let's go find the people who are at economic risk for clinical decision making. That's pretty straightforward. We know who they are. And let's find ways to help them. And ultimately, we're going to improve the health of the population, in my view, if we can have these kinds of partnerships. You can't do that if you're paying for a 10th beta blocker.
Right.
It can't be, you can't do both.
Right. Samantha, when you talk to entrepreneurs out there and you deal with the distribution issues, are you finding there's more interest in solutions of that sort, getting not just product, but if not partnerships, but something approaching that, so they're seeing more interest in
Definitely. So
marriages that grow revenue for everyone?
Definitely. So during the course of the development of Pharma, we kind of pivoted halfway through our software development and found that there was more of an interest in the data. And when I say the data, I'm talking about predictive analytics. So when people come to the Pharma site in their big hospital systems, whether Emory University or Hershey Medical Center, for example, we monitor their requests for product that they're not getting from their current contracts through our system, and we can monitor what they're paying outside of their contract with different wholesalers, with different distributors throughout the whole country, so we can kind of determine where these product shortages are happening in real time, what the average price is paid for outside of their contract. And this data, we've actually gotten interest from the government as well as private individual healthcare hospital systems who want to be able to have this data real time and know where we can kind of predict when these things are going to happen as we build our customer base and as we build our traction. And so you look at new revenue streams in regards to that. That's an additional subscription fee-based model that we will be providing to not only small distributors but manufacturers so that they can kind of see the supply and demand issues and or need for their product in the market, especially in the US. And being open just to collaborating with other people, I think, is very important for entrepreneurs, and to hear about like what other ideas are out there in regards to tech and data.
Mm-hmm. Here's a big picture question I always like to ask about the fate of some of the bigger companies. I mentioned before, emerging markets was the big buzzword. That's still so far playing out, and there are issues, of course, trying to grow into a lot of other markets that are not fully developed yet, or not distribution and regulation is not fully developed. So if we turn our attention squarely on the U.S. and some Western markets, where do you see, how do you see government regulation playing out, like Obamacare? If there are further delays, further hiccups, it's a moving target. It's not like it's a fixed point in time and a fixed set of goals anymore. How is that going to change the calculus for the sort of things you do and envision, the things we're talking about?
Wow. So, Will Rogers said there's no future in predicting the future, but, here goes. So I think if you look at even this week's New England Journal of Medicine's lead editorial about from the recently retired head of NICE, N-I-C-E, in Great Britain. A great piece. So I don't think the United States is going to have central price control anytime soon, but I'll go out on a limb and say I do think because of health reform, we're going to see more emphasis on the cost effectiveness and cost benefit of products. Maybe not in the FDA decision-making on safety and efficacy, but clearly any provider organization going at economic risk is going to care a lot more in 2014, 15, and 16 about the economics of the pharma products they're using. And so I would urge big and small pharma to help providers get that data.
And that goes back to the partnership.
Goes back to
question
the
here
partnership, that's
with
right.
ACOs and so forth.
Right, so I don't think we're ready for nice quite yet, and it wouldn't be nice, but we are in need of better population-based data and better information on the economics of these products to help providers who are now, it's a pocketbook issue for them.
And for payers too.
Payers
and
too.
In fact,
Sure.
when I talk to smaller companies that have orphan drugs, they spend a lot of time, and I know they make a point when talking to me at least, about spending a lot of time saying how they justify the prices for their new medicines with payers.
Right.
And of course, these are much, much more expensive products.
Right.
And I'm wondering, now you can't grow a Merck on that kind of a product, but you can grow some smaller companies that way. And I'm wondering if that model, if not always that type of product, is perhaps the way to go if you can justify the data that we've been talking about here.
Will bring us better information on the provider side, whether it's a rare disease, common disease. It's all about better information.
Okay. We have just about 8 minutes left, and I realize that we want to keep some time open for questions from the audience. Would anybody like to ask a question at this point?
See with the lights. They have a microphone. We wowed them. There's a question over there, Ed.
I'm sorry, I can't see it with the
hard to
lights.
see.
Oh, okay. Hi, thank you.
Hi, David.
Go ahead.
John Eichert. 20 years ago, we had the same conversation in the early 90s, and the industry created disease management, and they bought pharmacy benefit management companies. Right. They invested millions of dollars into creating new business models, only to abandon those and go back to their core business of making, discovering, developing, and marketing pharmaceutical products and medical device products and diagnostic products. What I'm curious to know about is, why do you think it's different today?
Easy.
Because the conversation is precisely and exactly the same conversation that I've heard and was part of 20 years ago. And it either says to me that the industry can't change and likes to talk about it, or that there really isn't an open-mindedness in the market to look at a drug company or a manufacturer any differently than just someone who sells drugs. So I'd be interested to know what your perspective is on why do you think it's different today, and do you think it's going to be another 20 years and we're going to have another panel talking about the same thing?
With the same people.
With the same people.
Not me.
Well,
go ahead.
I'll take a crack at it. So great question, John. I have two views on that. Yes, it's a lot of the same conversation, and you and I were a part of that even 10 years ago. I have two answers to your question. One is the federal deficit and sequestration is all about health care. That was not true 10 years ago. So the major thing that has changed, and I think hasn't really been talked about too much yesterday or today in the conference, is deficit equals health care spending. So today, if we don't figure this out, we will get there will be price control, and we'll be the ones to blame. So I think it's a whole different world than it was a decade ago, and it's all about the fact that we're almost at 20% of the GDP. So military spending with 2 wars, global terrorism, 4% of the GDP, healthcare, 5 times that. That's the difference between a decade ago and today. So my personal view is, if we don't figure this out, well, then whatever we get handed, we're going to deserve, including a nice, which won't be nice.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because I was sitting here listening a few minutes ago and thinking, when I started covering this industry in 1995, one of the first things I learned about was disease management.
Right.
And that's been flowing, as you say, ever since. I think what's different since then, particularly the PBM effort, was all about controlling the product, how it's going to be distributed, and getting a handle on wringing the profit from that exercise. I do think what's different now is more awareness and almost acceding to the need to appeal to those who want outcomes data, which we've also been talking about today. I think that mindset has changed, and there's finally a recognition that they've got to justify and demonstrate value. And that is one difference I detected anyway.
Hey, Ed,
from 18 years ago.
Speaking about value, I want to go back to something Samantha mentioned. So could you tell us a little more about the analytic engine that you're creating? Because I think there's value to unlock in that too. And you started it, but we didn't give you enough time.
Yeah, absolutely. So in accumulating all this data for purchases in regards to pharmaceuticals, those of you who are not in pharmaceuticals distribution or supply, right now, every single day, 89% of medical facilities can't find a drug that they need for their patients. Wow. And it's a bit of it's a huge problem. And the problem is when they do turn to this other market besides their contracts, they're often paying a 400 to 500% markup on these pharmaceutical products because they don't know where to find them. And so with our system and accumulating all the data for these pharmacy purchasers and medical facilities and putting requests through our system, who then gets sent out to the 40 to 50 different distributors that we have on our site who are licensed and vetted, they're able to actually see all the prices when people can get product to them and buy it at the most fair competitive price, whether it's a veteran-owned small business, woman-owned small business, or just someone in their local area that they want to purchase from for that particular product for when the patient has a need. And so us accumulating all this data real time is extremely valuable, not only to predicting pricing trends for future manufacturers of generic drugs, but also predicting supply chain issues in regards to the big three who aren't servicing the needs for their facilities and their doctors and their retail pharmacies and whatnot. And so being able to predict this over the course of time, obviously through the number of years, will become more valuable as we see those trends generate year to year to year. And I know those of you who have been in medical industry for 20, 30 years, you probably can predict somewhat around February, March, or maybe in the fall when flu vaccine becomes short or whatnot, these big things, you kind of know their trends like off the top of your head. But what you don't realize is sometimes when you're not monitoring when some of these generic manufacturers have FDA plant shutdowns or when they're experiencing a raw material shortage, as we monitor all this data of things coming up, you're able to see real time what's needed in the market, what's available in the market. Right now there's a lag in this kind of data that's accessible and available to medical facilities for them sourcing their medical products for their patients ultimately.
Great. It's fascinating. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Was there another question?
Right here.
I know there's been a lot of talk about cost effectiveness and how the market and the reimbursements and everything seem to be working in the wrong direction. I was familiar with the endo experiment you mentioned earlier, David, and the reasoning behind that was to be more cost efficient and quality conscious in delivering a service where you focused on a single area. So what is it about the industry, and I don't mean just pharma, but healthcare in general, that is so adverse to any cost consciousness, transparency about what things cost? It's impossible to call a doctor ahead of time if you have an insurance policy with a high deductible and find out what an exam for a UTI is going to cost.
Right.
They won't tell you over the phone. What is that barrier?
Yeah. You want to take that first?
I thought she was your friend.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So you take a first shot, please, and I'll go after.
You probably don't want to hear my answer, so we'll give Dr. Nash.
Oh, boy. That's a punt. Okay. Yeah, it's a great question. So everybody here read the Time magazine cover story a couple of months ago, and the bitter pill, and how come hospitals charge $20 for a Tylenol, and most of it is sadly true. My own view is the faster we get away from that, the better. I'm all about price transparency, and to me it means on the margin, what are we doing to improve outcomes, and can we get paid according to doing a better job? That's where we've got to go. And if price transparency is a part of that conversation, which I think it will be, then that's going to happen too. So smart provider groups who bear economic risk, they're going to advertise what their prices are. They may even get a guarantee for that price if they get a good outcome and eat the difference if they don't. And Geisinger, of course, a great national model for that, among a bunch of other places, with a real tightly organized system and owning the docs and owning the pharmacy. It's doable. I'm not sure Jefferson could do that tomorrow, but you best believe that successful integrated systems are working in that exact direction. And I envision a world where we'll have to have price transparency online for every procedure, everything we do, including the pharma component. Inevitable if you believe that we're headed in the direction of we can't continue to spend 20% of the GDP on one industry.
Another question? Back there?
Yeah, if I could just follow up on a little bit on that. So certainly focus on price transparency and outcomes is important, but it seems that part of the problem is related to our healthcare payment models in this country, and particularly the incentives, sometimes perverse incentives and cost shifting that occurs with our payment models. Could you speak to that and maybe what we need to do to try and address that problem?
Well, sure. Great closing question. When you change how providers are paid, they change their behavior. We have 10 years of research that would fill this room from the 90s that it works. So you put providers at economic risk for clinical decision making, and all of a sudden compliance and distribution channels and adherence is an important issue. So the short answer to your great question is, stand by, more news to follow. It's a little bit back to the future from 1995 to 2014, but when you put providers at economic risk for clinical decision making, all of a sudden they're going to look for what's the best evidence, what's the most cost-effective product, what can I do for the population, who else should be on the team, what about that compliance and adherence, what about behavior change. All those things come right to the front. If you stay at pay us for piecework, that's exactly what we'll do. So I guess you could tell I'm a proponent of bundled payment and capitation, and that's because the evidence, not just Nash's opinion, is it works.
We're a little over, but I'm going to unilaterally declare we have time for one more question, if there is one. Yes, there's a woman back there. Right? Is there anyone? Is the microphone still there?
Yep.
Thank you.
Magic.
Hi, thank you. You spoke a lot about partnerships, and I'm just wondering, no offense to you, Dr. Nash, but I'm curious about the fact that the pharma companies are going directly to the hospital systems for partnerships. Have you ever considered going to home infusion therapy companies and home care companies to partner with trying to get some of your outcomes that you're really looking for?
Well, the short answer is yes. I consider the home infusion part of the integrated delivery system, and so the partnerships include those organizations. I think it's very difficult if you had a national home infusion company. Well, they have lots of partnerships with pharma, big and small. So the short answer to your great question is yes, absolutely. Not just any single firm, but lots of companies are headed in that direction. We could talk more offline if you'd like. Ed, I'd like to make one plea, if I might, in the closing minute.
By all means.
I think everybody here, I hope you'll visit our School of Population Health booth and look at our publications. In particular, I wish everybody here would write up what their new companies are doing for our magazine, American Health and Drug Benefits. We'd really like to promote the work, the good work of companies like Samantha's and Kyle's and everybody else who's here today. So you have a sympathetic editor. That's a good thing. And we'd love to hear from everybody here. Thanks.
Well, I want to thank our panelists very much, David, Kyle, and Samantha, for your very interesting insights today. I want to thank everybody here for your questions and your attendance. I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of the MedCity Converge Conference.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ed.